Welcome to Plains. How many of you have not been here before? Wow. The rest of the new ones, I got a lot to talk about. Well, this is where I was born. If you play Trivia Pursuit, I'm the first president born in the hospital. That's right behind us where we are, right behind me now. And it's now the Lydian Carter nursing home. And my mother was a registered nurse, and so she was a assistant for the operating room. She was in charge of the operating room. And Dr. Sam Wise, who was a surgeon, wanted mother to be back on duty as quickly as possible. And they had an empty room right across from the operating room, and that's where I was born. I was conceived in a bed and breakfast. And there's a plaque on the door now called the conception room. My mother and dad lived there after they were married, and when she was about 7 months pregnant, that was on the upstairs, and they had to go up and down a ladder, so the doctor didn't want mother to go up and down a ladder anymore, so they had to get another place to live until I was born. And I was born 3 years before Rosa. And when she was born down on South Bond Street, I was her next door neighbor. And mother was a nurse, as I said, and so my mother says that I went over when Rosa was first born, looked through the crack in the cradle, and saw my future sweetheart living there. But 3 years is a lot of difference when you're 0 years old, and it's still a lot of difference when you are 16. We only had 11 years of school, and this is a schoolhouse in which Rosa and I were both educated. And when I was 16, she was just 13. So I paid no attention to Rosa at all at that time. But she was a good friend of my youngest sister, Ruth. And so Rosa will tell you when she'll arrive here in just a minute that they plotted when I went off to the Naval Academy to get us together. And that happened later on. Anyway, this is where we were born and raised in Plains. And then when I left the Navy, we came back to Plains without any discussion. When I left the governor's mansion, we came back to Plains. We never thought about doing anything different. And when I left the White House, we came back to Plains. So this has been our home. We lived in a government housing project when I got out of the Navy. When we had our first home together in Plains. We didn't have any money. We had to pay $31 a month rent in the government housing project, and we stayed there a year or so until our income got better. My first year at home was 1984. I came home from the Navy in 1983, and I began to be a farmer, and I was a farmer for about 17 years. And the first year that I was a full-time farmer was in 1954, and in 53. But anyway, 1954, and we had a terrible drought. And our total gross income for that year was $280. So we were living on less than $1 a day, as a matter of fact, but we got a very good place to live and so forth. But the next year was better, and I continued to improve my I guess, economic status. Rosa was not helping me at first, but as my business, and we tried one more time. And so that time our prayers were answered and we had a girl, Amy. So here comes Rosa.
Really late, I was in the building.
This was an outstanding school, by the way. Rosa and I were very lucky. We had a superintendent named Miss Julia Coleman. And when I was inaugurated president, I quoted Miss Julia. I was the first president that ever quoted a school teacher. And then when I got the Nobel Peace Prize, I quoted her again. And Miss Julia had very high expectations and ideals and hopes and dreams for the little country children that went here. And so we had to learn classical music. And she had a scratchy 48 RPM, 70 RPM record player, and she would play classical music. And we had contests almost every week in my class, and she would play a waltz or something like that on by Debussy, opera by Wagner or something. And we had to identify the name of the composition and who composed it. And she had the same requirements on great artists. She had a whole about 40 or 50 paintings, and she would flash the painting up, and we had to write down what the painting's name and who painted it and so forth. But we learned. We had one-act plays. We debated on the stage up here. So, and we not only if you won the first prize here in Plains, and you went and represented Plains High School at the congressional district level, and if you won the congressional district level, then you went on and became a state champion debater or composition. We also had in this summer in one of the empty windows in the bank building, my first cousin and I sold hamburgers in the wintertime and ice cream in the summer. And three dips for a nickel. Wow. And I was required by my older first cousin to go up and down the street and scream, I scream, you scream, we all scream, I scream. 3 dips for a nickel. So, and we started early on those days by going to my uncle's store, uncle's home, which is still in Plains. And we would make 3 big freezers full of ice cream, and we turned the handle out. I had to do most of the turning, but my cousin was older than I was. And we packed it around it with ice and salt to keep it frozen all during the day. I was in charge of the family's farm, primarily in Webster County. It was bought by our family when we moved back to Plains in 1904. I need not go into the detail about my grandfather being killed in a fight in 1903, and the family moved back into Plains in 1904. So we've had that farm since then. That's a new farm in the family. The older farm was Rosen's family's farm that was founded in 1833. So we still own those 2 farms. And collectively they make up about 33,000 acres of land. So we still have big farms, and we still grow peanuts, cotton, corn, and soybeans and so forth on our farms. We also grow pine trees, and that's one of Georgia's top agricultural products is pine trees. And a lot of young people in Plains got jobs on the railroad, and that was quite an achievement if you could get a job with the Seaboard Airline Railroad. This happened to be the main highway going east and west here was U.S. Highway 280, and the railroad was Seaboard Airline Railroad. They were fairly parallel east and west. So we were actually on the route between Savannah and Columbus. And at Columbus, the road and railroad divides basically, and south goes through Montgomery, Alabama, and you go to Los Angeles. If you go north to Birmingham, Alabama, then you wind up in San Francisco. So we had a lot of travel through Plains at that time. Plains had about 500 people when I was young, and it's now grown a lot. It's now about 650 people. By the way, we have 11 churches in Plains for the 650 people. So each church can be very large. Our largest and most aggressive, active church, I would say, is Lebanon Baptist Church, which is primarily members are African American. I came home from the what is that okay? Rosa came, I give Rosa the microphone reluctantly. I never answer your questions, but when I came home from the Naval Academy on summer leave the year before I became a senior or first classman, I was dating Miss Georgia Southwestern College, a beauty queen, and next to the last night I was home, her name was Annelle Green from University of Georgia, and Annelle's family had a family reunion, and she couldn't go out with me, which she had done every night I was home, so I didn't have a date, and so I was looking for a blind date, and went by the Methodist Church, and Rosa was out in front of a church getting ready to go to evening worship. And so I asked her to go to the movie with me, and she said, okay. So my sister and her date, and Rosa and I went in a Model A Ford. We sat in the rumble seat, and by the time we got through the movie and all, we were quite well acquainted. And Rosa was very quiet, very kind of a timid girl, but I liked her very much, very beautiful. And so the next morning, my mother said, Jimmy, what did you do last night? Since Naval was having a family reunion. And I said, I went to a movie. She said, did you go with anyone? By yourself? I said, I had a date. Who was it? I said, Rosa Smith. She said, what did you think of Rosa? And I said, she's the one I'm going to marry. But Rosa didn't know that. And didn't really know that. And next February, she came up to the Naval Academy on Lincoln's Washington's birthday. And while she was there, I asked her to marry me, and she said no. So from February to May, I was distressed, and Rosa would write me notes about all the boys she was going with. And finally, in May, she decided that she would marry me, and so we were married about a month later in June after I finished my naval academy. That was almost 70 years ago.
July
7th. Yes. We got married in July. I graduated in June, and I had to go to 3 places in the Navy before I could go to my ship. I went and learned about the operation of an aircraft carrier on the coast of California. And then I went over to Jacksonville and went and made long distance observation flights on the PBM. And then we went to Benco, Georgia, where they had blimps. So I had to learn how to operate and ride on the blimp and so forth. And after that month was over, then we got married. And I'll let Rosa tell you about the family, and then we'll have time to answer questions. And is that okay?
Are you through?
Yes. We have to answer questions later on.
Oh, if I put them down somewhere, I'll leave them.
It's voluntary. If you don't want it, should be fine.
I didn't know whether you meant you were through, and I stopped and understand. Well, the few things that he said that I'm not going to discuss with you, except one, times were different back then. We didn't do what people do today. My mother told me that she didn't hold hands with my father until they were engaged. We went a little further than that. Well, I grew up in Plains, and I went to school here too, and we had a great teacher, and Jimmy might not want me to start on this, but I'm going to tell you why I think she was such a great teacher. Have you ever heard of the Chautauqua program? Yes. Well, she went every summer to New York our whole life was built around the church and the school. All the entertainment was about the church. And we had, well, not all of it, because we had a bowling alley one time. But we would have pound parties and things like that. And people would use the pond house. So one day Ruth called and said, we're going to the pond house. You and I go in the pond house tomorrow to clean it up because somebody had used it the night before. You want to go with us? And of course, I spent the day with him. And it was that night that he got to the church. I was standing on the steps of the church and drove up and I'm not going to tell you, well, he asked me to go to the movie and we went to the movie. But I'm not going to tell you any more than that because we argue about it all the time. We wrote a book. Nothing yourself up. No, I don't remember the name. It was the worst thing we ever tried to do together. It was the closest we had ever been to a divorce. Yes, right. We couldn't mention the book. If we mentioned it, we started screaming. And it went on for a good while. And we were going to take the book. We were going to quit. And the editor came down and talked us into it. He said, okay, if you'll just continue with the book, when we get it all put together, you can have paragraphs, a little space where you think one thing and he doesn't agree with you. So if you want to read that book, we got J and R. Not every one of them was a disagreement. But I think maybe most of them, and how we met, is, not in the book. We couldn't ever get together on that. But it was not bad, it was just that, he would say, well, I don't think I'll go another day. It wasn't bad how much we, I mean, you could do 98% or 98 or 99%. But you know, you don't remember things right when we go places. I'm interested in things and different things. I mean, we found out when we were trying to recover. And I would, but anyway, we had a good life. And on July the 7th, we will have been married 70 years.
The Democratic candidates for president. For instance, we voted for, I guess Eisenhower twice for Stevenson, which very few states did. That's the entire state. After I ran for governor in 1970, that's when the Republicans began to take over. Not because of me, thank goodness. Lyndon Johnson did not carry Georgia because of his movement towards civil rights, his endorsement of civil rights. And so Gore would have carried Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and Arizona. So that's when it really began to change. But I think that this town now, when the election comes up in 2016, will vote Democratic. We have about 60% at least African Americans, and they're strongly Democratic. I would say in Plains, Richie, if you're a white person, the more likely you are to vote Republican. And we don't have very many rich people in Plains. But I think our attitude toward government has always been, supportive, and mainly one reason is because our actual president was elected. The 60s and 70s. I think I mentioned yesterday when I became governor, in my inaugural speech, I said the time of racial segregation is over. And it was a shock to the people of Georgia and to the nation that I said that. And 2 weeks later, I was on the front cover of Time magazine just because I made that statement. That was in 1970. Although, things were changing then. Georgia was one of the states, though, that had a very enlightened governor and administration in its top level. And we had a very influential newspaper in Atlanta, the Atlanta Constitution, that back in those days everybody read the newspaper, and very liberal, progressive on the race issue. So we never had any standing in the schoolhouse doors or calling out the National Guard. Georgia had 200 school systems. We have 159 counties in Georgia, and there's some independent systems in the large cities. Every one of those complied with the ruling of the Supreme Court. We didn't agree with when it was in the hands of HEW, that was Health, Education, and Welfare Department. We ignored HEW, but as soon as the Supreme Court ruled, Georgia complied. One of the things that we did was get out of the direct farming and agriculture business. I sold my warehouse. I had a cotton gin. I had a major peanut shelling plant. We shelled about 16,000 tons of peanuts for a year that went into food and salted nuts and that sort of thing, candy. And so I sold all of that and sold my warehouse business. Orchard Daniel Liquidment Company bought it. And so since then, we have depended for income primarily on my book writing and Rose's book writing. And I get a retirement as a president, which is, you might be interested in knowing, it's the same, it's fixed by law as the same as the income of a member of Congress. So if every time they raise the Congress 3%, kind of secretly, I get a 3% in my retirement benefits, and then I'm a full-time, I'm a professor at Emory University, and I get a salary from Emory University. So, and then my books. So we've got a very good income since then. I've never got on the lecture circuit, which is quite lucrative, as you know, and I don't serve on the board and things like that, but we have a good life. And we still live in the same house we had. We built our house in 1961 when a year when we had a good peanut crop.
I told you like yesterday afternoon, I think that I want to interrupt. Situation. He had been appointed to the school board. School board was elected back then, and his father had been on the school board. And Jimmy you were appointed. And he had seen the situation, plus our leading candidate for governor when he ran was no, not one. And but that's one of the reasons he got in, to try to do something about school. We were $1 million in debt, and we thought we were gonna lose we had this really thriving business when we went to the White House. We thought we were gonna lose our farms, and even thought we might lose our house. And we one Archer Daniels Midland started buying peanut places in South Georgia. They had Cohen, he bought about 30, I think. Anyway, we were able to sell the business, which was really fortunate.
Just said lucky that the important thing in my life was telling the truth. That's a profoundly significant factor in a person's life that permeates throughout almost everything that he or she decides. When I went to my daddy was a very strict disciplinarian. And the worst thing that I could possibly do was to tell my father a lie. I never did do that. I don't remember doing it. My daddy gave me a whipping 5 times when I was growing up. The first time I stole some money. My daddy gave me a penny to put in the collection plate at Place Baptist Church. And when I got home, I had 3 pennies. I had stolen 2 pennies out of the collection. So I got a whipping, which you can see I have never forgotten. And when I got to the Naval Academy, U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, the #1 requirement was that you never lie. If you stepped on the grass and an upperclassman saw you from a distance and said you stepped on the grass and gave you maybe 10 demerits, and you said, I didn't do it, and then they go back and find your footprint on the grass, you were out. You were out of the Navy, back home in disgrace. And when we came home on vacation in Canada, I began to tell the people, I will never lie to you. If I make a misleading statement, don't vote for me. So I think, tell the people the truth, be honest with them, which is very difficult in politics. It's difficult, I think, in anything. It's not always impossible. It's not always possible because you have to tell a little white lie. And I remember that when I was running for office, my mother did not like reporters, and she particularly did not like female reporters. And so, in the final stages of my campaign, my press secretary, Judy Powell, told my mother that he had arranged for her to have an interview with a woman that represented the Washington Post. And mother objected, but finally agreed to help me get elected. So the woman came into the farmhouse where my mother was living, and mother welcomed her in, and she was kind of negative. And she said, well, why do you think your son should be president? Mother said, well, he's a good boy. He's always been very good, and he's hard working and all. And the court said, yeah, but he said he would never tell a lie. And have you ever known your son to tell a lie? And mother hemmed and hawed around. Finally, she said, well, I would say every now and then he told a little white lie. And the reporter said, aha, he told a little white lie, huh? And my mama said, yeah. And she said, what is a white lie? She said, well, you remember when you came in the door a while ago? I said, I was glad to see you. So that's kind of different. But I would say, they don't tell the truth and treat people.
I had promised my father on his deathbed that I would finish school. He was one of 8 or 9. Finish college. We married when about before I was 19. I was 18 at that time. And it was too early. I had known this was the next spring after I started going to the summer before. And so I had to decide what I wanted to do. And he was insistent. And I gave in. I never have been sorry.
When I do, I walk and ride a bicycle and swim. And we ride, I always hate to get into this, but we ride a trike. A trike is, how many of you know what a trike is? I can't believe that. You have one. Well, that's what we ride. We ride a trike, which I had both my knees replaced. A trike is a remarkable machine. By remarkable, I'm being honest. You stand on it, and it has 3 little wheels, and you move the handlebars back and forth and sway like you're skiing, and it miraculously moves. And Rosa rides a trike too, so we take a lot of exercise. Every day, we walk a couple miles or not a couple miles. No, I took up painting first when I was in the Navy. I was on the battleship, and I was in charge of the education program on the battleship, which was called United States Armed Forces Institute, USAID. And so I taught enlisted men who were trying to finish their high school and get a GED. And sometimes I taught college classes for people when I knew what the subject was. So I had classes on this. I just at the boy at home. But, you know, in a small town like Plains, which has, say, 60% African Americans now, which always has been, we learned a lot about life and all of its aspects than you would if you lived in a small part of Philadelphia, in my opinion. And we had to learn how to deal with, you know, churches and schools and biracial things and all of life, just about. So we were not segregated from each other in life. So I think growing up in a small town has great advantages.